Thank you so much for joining us, and really thank you for everybody for joining us. I want to say I'm excited. This is a first for ABNY in our 50-year history. I know this is also a first for New York. And to have our senior senator as majority leader, we are thrilled with us today after a long night. He is our champion, Senator Chuck Schumer. Now, you all know Senator Schumer has a well-earned reputation for getting things done, rolling up his sleeves, schlepping every year to all 62 counties in our state and working hard for the people of New York. But he is so much more as a person. He is honorable, he is decent, he is compassionate, he is visionary, and he is wise. He's somebody we can look up to, someone we could admire and really be proud of to have as a leader for our whole country. And this has been an unusual 4 years for us all. And I just want to say he proves that the laws of the universe are still true, that you can be a hardworking person with integrity and an ethical standard, and that will pay off in life. And all the while he is championing us as New Yorkers. I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of his great accomplishments for us, like protecting Social Security and Medicare for our seniors, encouraging and never giving up on infrastructure projects like Gateway, delivering billions of funds for our city and state after Superstorm Sandy and the terrorist attacks in 9/11. And most recently in this pandemic, a combined $8 billion for the MTA that averted layoffs and service cuts, tens of billions of dollars for our hospitals and schools, and resources for our businesses and our communities, and incredible things like Save Our Stages. Today, he continues to fight for assistance we need in our communities, but really for our whole country. It is an honor to have him back. And I will say, Senator, while we all can't see each other, there are hundreds and hundreds of people from our ABNY community on here. We are so proud to have you as our representative. We are proud to have you back today. We are here to be helpful. And I just want to say thank you and zoom over to you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And I do like that goatee. Those little gray touches are very, as they would say in France, distingué, distinguished. So thank you. I want to begin a moment, though. This is in a little bit of a sad moment because this is the first time I'm talking to ABNY since Steve's father, Howard, a good friend of mine, passed away. And there were hundreds of thousands of people who knew Howard, I think. And he was a friend to almost everyone. Everyone who met him felt, this guy's my friend. And when he says he wants to help me, he really does. I found that throughout. And it's quite poetic that Howard's son, Stephen, equally capable to his old man, is leading ABNY during a great time of crisis when Howard founded ABNY with Lou Rudin and some others, founded ABNY back during the first crisis. And that's how I met Howard. I've gone from crisis, I've helped New York crisis to crisis. I was an assemblyman in 1975. I got elected at age 23. I'd worked for a big law firm, didn't like it, ran for the assembly on a lark. No one thought I'd win. In fact, the first day I ran, I went into my local barber, Frankie. I said, Frankie, would you put a poster in the window? He said, sure, kid. And then he said, kid, I'm not only the local barber, I'm the local bookie. You're the 50-to-1 underdog. How much you want to bet on yourself? I was running against the Democratic machine. Howard, so I come to Albany at 23 years old. I was one of the youngest elected since Teddy Roosevelt. And New York's in crisis. That was the big moment. Gerald Ford, the cover of the Daily News, Gerald Ford to New York, dropped dead. And who's there? Howard and Lou, helping us figure out what to do. It was incredible. And so that's how I met Howard. And I just want to say, Stephen, your dad was a great man, a good friend of mine. Always, whenever you asked Howard to help, he did. He wasn't one of these people who said, I'll help you, and then never did. He did. He must have helped 100 people a day. So we miss him, but our grace is that someone as capable as him is now running ABNY during the crisis that we have now. And one thing I would say, I say it over and over, I've lived through all these crises as an elected official. Whether it was that crisis in 75 or 9/11 or the financial crisis or Sandy or now, of course, this pandemic flu. And each time the naysayers say New York's finished, always different reasons. Oh, we'll be the target of a terrorist attack. Oh, the financial industry's shot. Oh, we are too densely populated. We always come back, always, always, always. And we will again. I don't care what the naysayers say. I don't care all the pundits and the people who like to write articles, that they think, well, they used to say make a splash. Now they say get clicks. But in any case, they're wrong. There's a need for cities that are densely populated, where diverse populations from around the country and around the globe can bang into each other, commingle, learn from each other, and compete with each other. And New York attracts those people, and there'll always be a need. And some people will leave, and new people will come in. So I love New York. Here's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. Some people ask me so many questions, like, what about January 6th? So let me talk about my January 6th. I would sum it up by the opening line of Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, where he said, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That's how I'd sum up January 6th for me. January 5th, as you may remember, was Election Day in Georgia. And we all knew it might be a long shot, but if we won those 2 seats, we would take back the Senate. Well, as January 5th, the night bled into the early morning of January 6th, Wednesday morning, I was glued to the TV, to the computer. I'd probably click every 30 seconds to find out the new numbers from this county or that county. Finally, at 4 a.m., it's clear that both Ossoff and Warnock had won. I recruited Warnock. I tried to get Stacey Abrams to run. She said, no, there's someone, I'm not running. She wanted to run for governor. But there's someone as good as me, Raphael Warnock. I had met him once because he has a bit of a New York connection. He was the associate pastor at the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem for a couple of years. But in any case, he and Ossoff won. And I said, wow, holy moly. I had a little word in between holy moly that I'm not allowed to say here on the Zoom with all your nice people, but I said, holy moly. Holy F moly. I am going to become the majority leader. Wow. And my first reaction, of course, was one of joy. I had worked long and hard for this. No one thought we'd get it. The November 3rd elections were disappointed. I felt so good. But I had a second reaction pretty soon thereafter. And the reaction was what I would call awesome, filled with awe. But not awesome the way my teenage daughters used to say, gee, Dad, that's awesome. But rather in the biblical sense of the angels, when they saw the face of God, they trembled in awe. And this job was a hugely important job. And with all the problems we have with COVID, with the health problems, the economic problems, all the problems we have in America, the racial scars that we had seen ripped open by the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I said, what a huge responsibility is on my shoulders. I'm going to fight hard. I'm going to be a happy warrior. But it hit me, the responsibility, just a few minutes after the joy hit me. So those were the 2 emotions I went to bed with at about 4:30 a.m. And I woke up at about 7, got in my car, drove down to Washington. At 1 p.m., I was on the floor of the Senate. And I spent about 45 minutes on the floor of the Senate. I hadn't even given a speech yet as the putative majority leader, when a police officer with a big bulletproof vest and a big submachine gun strapped across his waist grabs me firmly, caringly, by the collar and says, Senator, you're in danger. We got to get out of here. I was within 30 feet of those sons of guns, 30 feet. These insurrectionists, these violent white racists who have no respect for democracy or anybody but themselves, despicable. And so that was the 6th, the best of times and the worst of times. Incidentally, I've met with Merrick Garland. I've made it clear to him that every resource the Justice Department needs to prosecute every one of these people to the full extent of the law should be used. And the FBI has asked me in every little Zoom I do, this isn't one so little, so it's a lot of people, they have a website and they have faces, 700 faces of people who were in the building that day. And you should go on it and see if you recognize. You say, how am I going to recognize? I wouldn't know anybody like that. But it's weird. Oh, that was Harold. I went to school with him in New Jersey. He moved to Indiana. So look on the website. You might be able to help the FBI. Anyway, best of times, worst of times. 2020 Queen Elizabeth, every year right before Christmas, gives a review of of the monarchy to her British subjects. And one year, and I think it was 1994, she called it Annus Horribilis, horrible year, because Diana and Prince Charles were fighting. This was our Annus Horribilis, the worst healthcare crisis in a century, since the Spanish pandemic flu. Every one of us knows somebody who has passed away. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We all see that throughout New York. I don't have to elaborate on that to you. And as I mentioned, the racial scars ripped open. But the year ended with three good things. God works in threes, they say, in mysterious ways. So first, Donald Trump lost the election. I think that's a very good thing for America. And the vast majority of New Yorkers agree with me, not everybody, but just about everybody. And, you know, the fact that he moved to Florida, it's fine. I'm happy to not have him not be in New York and a New York resident. The second thing that happened is the vaccine was developed miraculously. Many of it, some of it by New York companies. And it's going to really help us turn the corner. Trump did a mediocre job of manufacturing the vaccine. In fact, I had pushed him to put $8 or $9 billion into helping rather than the 1 or 2 he proposed. But he did a horrible job of distributing it. States didn't have money. The states didn't know when they were getting the vaccines, et cetera. Now, with this vaccine and with the new bill that we have just passed, and I'll get to that in a minute, and the one we passed in December, it's going to get much better. People estimate that by September, enough Americans and enough New Yorkers will be vaccinated that will have really turned the corner on this awful disease. I think that's the Biden administration's official estimates. I think actually they're lowballing it. They're going to do better. And in the December bill, which I'll get to in a minute, we provided enough money so every New Yorker and every American gets it for free. It's not through an insurance company and they take a deductible and this and that. Everyone gets the vaccine for free. We also provided some money to the states to distribute it because obviously then Trump wasn't. But in the new bill that we just passed last night, and as I mentioned, I'll get to that in a minute, but we passed it 4 hours ago. I went to bed at 5:30 and that's why I was late. I apologize. I got 2 hours sleep, took, as I said, quickly did everything I could, and here I am. But in the new bill, President Biden has asked for $160 billion for the federal government to actually administer the vaccine, to set up centers throughout the country, many in New York, making sure minority communities and poor communities are not put at the bottom of the list. And they will be manned by FEMA personnel, maybe by National Guard, and 100,000 new healthcare workers. In these centers, people can line up and get the vaccine. And those should start in a couple of months, and those will really help us turn the corner. So I actually think the vaccine, the second good thing that happened, will be available. It'll be enough people will have it injected in their arms. My guess is by late June, early July, we're going to turn the corner a little sooner than people think. Okay. The third good thing that happened is in December was the COVID relief bill. You may remember we passed the CARES bill back in March. I negotiated that with Mnuchin, and that's why our hospitals got hundreds of millions of dollars. Our schools got $1 billion. New York State government got 10 billion. The MTA got 4 billion. I made sure New York did well. But we thought back then in March, as everybody did, that COVID would be gone by the summer. So most of the good provisions expired. And Mitch McConnell, unfortunately, he was then the majority leader, said, we don't have to do anything, let's pause. There actually, he said this, this was his own estimate. There were 20 people in his caucus who wanted to spend $0. So hard right that they said, if the private sector can't do it, we don't want the government involved at all. And when you have a big crisis like this, the private sector can't do it all. Individuals can't do it all. You need the federal government. But finally, in late December, we were able to pass the first bill. And that bill has a lot of good things in it for New York that I'm going to go over here, and for the country. The payments, obviously, for people making families below 150, individuals 75 is $600. That's been 90% of the people have that already. But we're going to move it up another $1,400 to $2,000. So if you're a family of 4, you'll still get a check in the new bill, once we pass it, God willing, of $5,600. We extended unemployment benefits, $69 billion to distribute vaccines, $88 billion for our schools so they could open safely. New York City has done a better job than most places. The schools have not been closed. They're open some days and virtual some other days for each kid, but it's better. We got another $4 billion for the MTA. We got $25 billion in rent relief and an extension of the moratorium. To have a moratorium without rent relief, what good is that? Because people will owe the money. The landlords are not getting the money. We have a lot of landlords in Brooklyn and Queens and Staten Island who are landlords in 2-family and 3-family houses. And if their tenants lose their job and can't pay their rent, they're really stuck. We got $10 billion for childcare, money for SNAP, and something I'm proud of, we got $2 billion for funeral costs. You know, some of the most heartbreaking things you see are children and grandchildren saying goodbye to their loved ones who are in the hospital dying of COVID, and they can't be with them, can't hug them, can't say goodbye in person. But adding insult to injury, many families who had lost their jobs didn't have money for a funeral. There are 7,000 bodies still not being buried. And the indignity of not being able to give your loved one who you couldn't even see a decent burial, a decent funeral. Well, we've got money in FEMA, reimbursed people for funeral costs during Sandy. Now they'll do it here. And the thing that probably most affected was that I had to work the hardest for New York was the $325 billion in small and nonprofit relief. We know that's going to our small businesses, and we put aside about $15 billion for CDFIs and MDIs, community development, financial institutions, minorities, so small and minority businesses could get it. But I made sure all nonprofits would get the money, including our big New York institutions, our museums like Natural History and Modern Art. These are a lifeblood of our economy, yet they're losing money, they're closing, firing employees, they can't help it, no one's there. Now they will get PPP money, and they can go a lot longer time. We also got something called Save Our Stages. We're an arts center, New York is. And all of our venues, from Broadway all the way down to these little independent arts venues where people come to listen to music and dance and sing, they're the first to close and the last to open because they need large numbers of people congregating closely. They are included now in the bill. I had to fight like the devil to get our New York museums. Well, those are rich museums. They don't need money. And Broadway. Well, let's give it to the small groups, but not to Broadway. Well, money's in the bill for those two groups. And if I wasn't there, it wouldn't have happened. Now we have another COVID relief bill. This is the bill we passed last night. It's $1.9 trillion. And many of us in Washington are haunted by the mistakes of 2008 and 9. During that crisis, most economists said you needed over $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion to get the economy going. But they didn't have enough votes. They compromised with the Republicans, who cut it back in half of what was needed. And the recession lasted for 4 or 5 years. In addition, we spent a load of time negotiating one bill, a good bill, the ACA, the Obamacare, but didn't do anything else. So we've learned that lesson. And we want to work with our Republican friends. But if you listen to economists, most of them, they say we need to go, it's better to overshoot than undershoot. Right now, interest rates are low, inflation is low. The danger of the economy staying in this bad situation for a long time, and the danger, frankly, of the bottom 50% of America never getting out of the crisis. You can't have a society where half of the country feels they're disconnected from the rest of the country, feels isolated, feels they have no economic future, was vital. So the Biden plan is a good plan. And one thing I was able to make sure of, $350 billion for direct state and local relief. That was the biggest thing left out of the other bill because McConnell and the Republicans were opposed. Now, I got money into this. I got a lot of money into New York despite that. The state government itself got about $10 billion through education, through the mass transit, through other rental assistance and things like that. But they need direct aid. And Biden didn't want as high as 350, but Speaker Pelosi and I pushed it so it would be much higher. And there's going to be real money for our localities. We also got some more money in the two bills for hospitals. Many of the heads of the New York hospitals said they would have been finished without the money I was able to get. And we wrote a formula in both bills that's favorable to our hospitals, which had such trouble, particularly back in the spring. We got another 20 billion for public transit. I have to write the formula in both the public transit and in the state and local so that New York is favored. But being majority leader, I can't just do it on my own, but I have a lot of say in how that's going. And so there's a lot of things in this bill that are very good for New York. And by the way, if anyone works for the city, we don't say all the money in the state and local goes to the state, because I know that when the state gets the money, the localities say they never give it to them. Same thing with the schools. They say that too. Anyway, we're providing enough money for this. We divide the 350 billion about half and half. So half goes directly to the state and the other half goes to New York City, Nassau County, the local towns and villages. And we are working with something, as you've heard, called reconciliation, which will have that. The bill also, for those of you affiliated with education in the schools, puts another 170 billion, the bill we passed last night, into K through 12 and higher education, which is hurting as big as the other. And another very good thing in the bill is the Restaurants Act. The restaurants were eligible for the PPPs, but they have bigger trouble, as you know. So we got 25 billion. I worked very hard. Tom Colicchio did a very good job building a coalition. We worked closely with him for our restaurants. We're going to try to get more money than that, but we made sure that happened. We got more funding for the Save Our Stages I mentioned in this bill, more money for the large nonprofits, and we extended PP eligibility for profits like the YMCAs, the Habitat for Humanity chapters, the Jewish community centers, et cetera, which didn't get it before. A couple more things I want to highlight before we go to your questions. On state and local aid, in the last bill, as I said, we got 5.8 for education. That helped the state government, 4.2 for mass transit, 1.6 for vaccine testing, 1 billion more for our hospitals, 465 million for child development block grant. So even in the last bill where we didn't get direct aid, we got a lot of money, and I'm always fighting for money for New York. And if people block it, like McConnell didn't say, I'm not giving direct state aid, we find ways around it. SALT, very important. This was a nasty, nasty proposal in the Trump tax bill, aimed, quote, at the blue states. It doesn't really just affect the blue states, although the blue states are more affected because we tend to be a little more generous in terms of how good our school, what the money we put into schools, the money we put into transit, the money we put into services for poorer people. And it was just nasty. And so they put a cap on the SALT deduction. I am pushing very, very hard to get rid of that. And, you know, it shouldn't be that states that are more generous should be penalized. That deduction has been there, I think, from the very, very beginning. And let me just say, they say it's just for the 1%, bullshit. Before the cap was put in place, more than 3.4 million New Yorkers were benefiting from SALT with an average deduction of $23,000. So I just introduced a bill Friday with many members of the New York delegation. We're fighting hard to get SALT, either in this first COVID bill or the second bill. And so that's important. People have asked about future Mta relief. As I mentioned, we got plenty more money there. Gateway. This is another thing that Donald Trump just was nasty to New York on. And as a New Yorker, you'd think he would have helped us, but he didn't. So for 4 years, and even before that, under Obama, I was very eager for Gateway. It's the only tunnels under the Hudson River. If they were to be unusable, our whole economy, not only the New York, New Jersey economy, but the whole Northeast economy would collapse if you can't do transit under the Hudson River. So now there's money sitting there. And now with the new administration, I've already worked with I've talked to the president that we got to just, all they got to do is get some documents moving. It won't take very long, a few months, and we can start working on Gateway. It's all a huge shot in the arm to our economy when at the time our economy is suffering. It's one of the largest public works projects around. And here's more good news. The Deputy Transportation Secretary is somebody named Polly Trottenberg. She was the New York City Transportation Commissioner, and before that, she worked for me for 9 years. In fact, when Pat Moynihan, when I beat D'Amato in '98, Moynihan called me to his office and he said, first, I want to tell you I'm not going to run again. Now that you're here, you can carry on my legacy, part of which was New York Transit and helping New York hospitals. But he said, I'm going to give you a gift. And in his Moynihan way of speaking, he said, Polly Trottenberg. She worked for me. She's now there as the Deputy Transportation Commissioner, and she will help us with Gateway. Okay, so let me just conclude there. I've touched on some of the things, Steve, that you've asked me to touch on. We did just get, by the way, another $2 billion for New York. See, these are the kind of things you can do with the Democratic president and the Democratic majority leader. So we wanted FEMA to pay 100% reimbursement costs. Trump would only do 75, even though I called him 3 times. Each time he promised me, he never did it. But I just got the Biden administration to do it, and that gives New York state government $1 billion and New York City government $1 billion. That's already being delivered. So there are lots of things we can do in that area that make sense. And I am going to just keep fighting for this city that I love. New York's in my bones. I'm a New Yorker. What can I tell you? For better, or as they say in Brooklyn, for better or for worse, I'm a New Yorker. Steve, let's take the rest of the time for questions.
Perfect. Senator, thank you for everything. Well, you said, you made the comment earlier, working with our Republican friends. Can you talk about how you see bipartisan cooperation in the time ahead, and is it really possible, and what it might look like? Okay. You know, when I got to the Senate, it was quite bipartisan. And Democrats and Republicans, we didn't agree on, choice would divide the parties, the progressive nature of the tax system would divide the parties, but there was so much we could work on. Now, the big question is, where will the Republican Party go? And there's a part of it that is just still in the thrall of Donald Trump. And if they stay that way, and, he linked up with these hard right views, there's not much to do. We'll have to do it on our own. But there are a good number of Republicans who I think don't want to stick with Donald Trump. They'll be more conservative than the Democrats and less willing to spend money and all of that. And that's fine. That's part of the system. That's what works. And there are certain issues where I hope we can start bringing them along. Last night on the floor of the Senate, I made sure as majority leader that some of the amendments, the first amendments that were added to this bill, the first one was the Restaurants Act, which I helped write, but it was sponsored by Kyrsten Sinema, a Democrat of Arizona, and Roger Wicker, a Republican of Mississippi, to set the tone. And lots of the amendments last night were indeed bipartisan in terms of, making the bill better and dealing with certain places where we needed it. 2 areas where I'm optimistic, and I'm an optimist by nature. I wouldn't be in this job if I wasn't an optimist, that's for sure. But 2 of the areas I'm optimistic in where we can get bipartisan support. One is infrastructure. In the past, it's always been bipartisan. And Joe Biden has proposed a large infrastructure bill. I left that out in my remarks, but we're doing this ARP bill, ARP, American Rescue Plan first, to help just get us out of the COVID crisis. But the second bill we hope to do, starting after we finish this bill, which should be in March, I have something called an impeachment trial that we got to get going next week. I'm saying it should be fair, but move along at some fairly legitimate rate of speed. But in any case, after we finish the first bill, the next priority, Speaker Pelosi and I believe, and President Biden,
should be his Build Back Better, which is a massive infrastructure bill. It's green. It includes left out minority communities. It's a very good bill and has a lot of support. And I'm hopeful we can get Republicans helping us on that, because the fundamental core of the bill is infrastructure. It will help jobs in New York. It will help us rebuild our infrastructure, which is so needed. All of that is very, very important. And the other place I'm hopeful is immigration reform. As you know, I'm passionate about immigration. Immigration is needed by New York. You know, it's our lifeblood. After Uncle Ellis, who was named after Ellis Island, and that's why they named me Ellis. And our daughter's middle name is Emma, for Emma Lazarus, the poet. This long, you know, this had nothing to do with politics, it's what I believe. And Emma Lazarus was the one who wrote the poem, "Give me your poor, give me your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." That's on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. In any case, lots of Republican support for immigration reform, because business needs immigrants. And in the bill McCain and I passed, which was the most successful large immigration reform bill, which passed the Senate bipartisan 70 votes, and then of course got stuck in the House because the Tea Party didn't want to do any immigration, and that's the Trump wing of the party that I mentioned. But there's a lot of people who did. But it said any foreigner who studies STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and gets a degree in STEM, gets a green card stapled to their diploma. It also provided entry for low-income folk, you know, farm workers and others who were needed, and provided a pathway to the 11 million undocumented people who would give a path. It was not an easy path to citizenship, but it was a sure path to citizenship. And now more than ever, our businesses need immigrants. You talk to owners of McDonald's franchises, they can't get enough workers. So we don't only need PhDs in science and technology or farm workers, but across our economy, we need immigrants. And one of the things that slowed down dramatically with Trump, he was nasty to all immigrants, legal, illegal, highly educated, uneducated. Our population in New York is slowing down because of a lack of immigrants, as well as in the country. And we don't want to get to the stage of Italy or Japan, where the number of people working compared to the number of people retired is so low that it drags down prosperity. So I am hopeful we can get strong business support for a bipartisan immigration bill. And there are other kinds of things that we probably have to do bipartisan. I think there's a lot of looking at how you deal with Section 230, which is the internet, and how you deal with, you know, the problem that there is so much mistruth on the internet. But at the same time, you don't want to have the government controlling what the private sector says or people say. So there are issues that lend themselves to bipartisanship, and I hope those will emerge. I also hope that the Republican Party will wrest itself away from the grip of Donald Trump. And if they do, the prospects for bipartisanship are much greater, even on these kinds of bills that we're doing now.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit of things that help we might be able to give to struggling tenants and sort of smaller landlords in New York across the country who have really had a hard time?
Yes. So just to have a moratorium doesn't do much good, because when the moratorium expires, if you're a worker who was thrown out of work because of COVID and don't have an income, or you have a much lower income, you won't be able to pay the rent. That also hurts the landlords, and people hurt worse than anybody else are the small little landlords. I go to my places like Bushwick. I speak to community boards, you know, every week. And you hear from these landlords, you know, they own a 2-family house or a 3-family house. It's their little piece of the rock. And if one of the tenants loses his or her job, and then because of COVID, they're not getting any money for the rent, and they have to pay the utilities, and they have to pay the mortgage, and they don't have a cushion. So we want to make sure of 2 things. Number one, that tenants who lose their jobs. In New York, in the last bill, I made sure this got $1.3 billion that can just be used for rental assistance. And that's about 1/3 of the problem, but we're putting more money into this bill, and they should get an equal amount of money in the bill that just passed last night, that passed the Senate. And it passed the House too. We just have to now fill in the blanks, because reconciliation has two parts. One, you do a big budget and say, what are the top line numbers? How much money for the finance committee? How much money for the commerce committee? Then you fill in the details, and that's what we'll do in the next few weeks. But in any case, there's more money in that bill for them. And we also, and here's a very, if you're a small landlord and your tenant isn't paying the rent, we allow you to apply under a group of conditions. So there's good money for this because it's a real problem, and it's dedicated to just being used for the purposes I've mentioned.
I want to say thank you for the Restaurant Act and Save Our Stages. They're so huge for us given all the people who work in those industries. Can I ask how you see kind of going forward in the return of tourism, whether it's supporting the airline industry or supporting getting people moving again, and how you kind of look at that over the next week?
Yeah. So this is very important, and a couple of things I would say. The Save Our Stages was so vital to New York, and again, not just to Broadway, although I worked really hard for Broadway, and a number of the Republicans said we're not helping Broadway, but we did. Maybe a few Democrats too, but they didn't tell me to my face. In any case, Broadway, look, take Broadway, take the Museum of Natural History, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're an economic engine for New York, and not just for fancy people. This is why tourists come to New York. This is why tourists eat in the restaurants, spend money in the hotels. And who do those restaurants and hotels employ? Lots of working class people who live in the Bronx and my home borough of Brooklyn. By the way, I didn't mention, I am the first majority leader ever from New York. What do you think of that, Stephen? Not bad. I love New York. I'm glad to break a record. Couldn't be, okay. Anyway, so these industries are vital, and that's why I tried to allocate some specific money to them. The Restaurants Act, in the last bill, the one in December, we didn't get money. We got money for PPP, but that's not good enough for the restaurants because they're in worse shape than a lot of the other businesses, because no one's eating there, particularly in the winter. Eat outside, not such a great thing when it's 25 degrees outside, even with heaters. Although you should still go, please go to restaurants even when it's cold. I don't want to discourage. But so we needed special help for these industries. But once they come back, very interesting. There was an article by Neil Irwin, who's an economist in the New York Times. And he asked, why is the stock market going up so much when the economy is hurting so badly? And he had an interesting theory. He said people are saving more money than they ever did because they can't spend it on what they used to spend it on, going out for a meal, taking a vacation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, once the economy turns the corner, those industries are going to boom. And in fact, he thought the stock market would go down some because people would take their savings and start spending them the way they used to. These industries are vital. In the new bill, we extend the airlines, the extension of keeping the airlines going till COVID's over, till September. It had expired. We did it in the first bill, the first December bill in March. And we're keeping an eye on this because this is vital. It's probably 25% of New York's economy, but I have allies in other states. My Nevada colleagues are very interested, my Florida colleagues, California. A lot of states depend on tourism and travel. And so we have to be really mindful of it. So cultural, arts institutions, I look for every kind of institution that makes New York special and attracts people here, and try to make sure I help them to get through these tough times so they can come back stronger than ever.
Terrific. Senator, we promised we would get you out by 10 a.m. So we got about a minute to spare. I really want to say thank you. You hear the list of things you fought for us, and it's amazing and gives us hope, which is, I think, probably the thing we need most right now.
Well, let's have hope and confidence, Stephen, in the future of New York. As I said, I started in '75, and each crisis, lots of people wrote New York off. It never happened. It won't. New York will be a booming city for decades and even centuries to come. So folks, don't lose your faith in this city. We're resourceful, we're strong, we're diverse, and somehow even when people write us off, we bounce back. I'm confident that will happen again.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Take care. Bye-bye.